This talk is largely based on the first chapter of my third academic book, which is called Political Theory and South Asian Counter-Narratives. Uh, uh, the book talk I previously, and generally the publishers say that to promote the book, you need to actually circulate the book is out. Somebody should know. Although I got a royalty already with Routledge was very efficient. This March they transferred the royalty, but you need to have that talk. A chapter of this book was presented recently in the Institute for Social and Economic Change in Bangalore, and this is the second part of the book talk. I was denied to present the book talk at Presidency University because of bureaucratic paraphernalia. But anyway, it's my home ground, so I will be very glad to have a discussion with you. So let me first start the talk here. In this year of the Gregorian calendar of 2023, I am celebrating the silver jubilee of my association with the discipline of political science. Incidentally, my current workplace, the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, is celebrating its golden jubilee. My association with the discipline of political science started by attending a lecture of a school teacher hailing from a Bengali Dalit family in 1998. In his class lectures, I came across the word justice uttered in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. The school textbook at that time also had references to the word while mentioning how the word justice is a core normative concept in the domain of political theory. In the same year of my higher secondary schooling, as an adult citizen of the country, I was conscious of the word justice in reading daily newspapers in Bengali and English. Before attending the political science lectures at a South Kolkata school from 1998 to 2000, justice for me was a person as it appeared as an honorary acclamation for judges in courts, like the word doctor appears for those who are either in the medical profession after completing years of training, or for those who earn the highest academic degree in most disciplines after years of research. At that time, justice for me was some court judge like Justice Devi Prasad Pal and Justice Padma Khastede, with whom I met with my maternal grandfather in mid-1990s. My maternal grandfather was a high court lawyer. However, he did not pursue the profession seriously. I used to get information about judges in the Alipur lower court and Calcutta High Court from him and a lower court lawyer who used to live at our residence in the 1990s. Sometimes I had a glimpse of some texts in jurisprudence and all India records of high courts and Supreme Courts about case histories in his private office cum library. By the time I was enrolled in the Department of Political Science at Presidency College, Deepak Dasgupta, the college teacher, was meticulous about preparing notes from several Euro-American scholars like George Holland Sabine and Thomas Landon Thorson's A History of Political Theory. The book was first published by Sabine in 1937. We read the fourth edition published by Oxford University Press in 1973. Norman Patrick Barry's An Introduction to Modern Political Theory, Macmillan 1981. Ernest Barker's Principles of Social and Political Theory, Clarendon Press 1951. Cyril Edwin Murchison George's, popularly known as C. M. George's Introduction to Modern Political Theory, Clarendon Press 1924. Raymond Garfield Kettle's History of Political Thought, Allen and Unwin 1936. And William Archibald Dunning's A History of Political Theories, Ancient and Medieval, New York, Macmillan, 1902. Professor Dasgupta was teaching Plato's idea of justice from the above-mentioned textbooks. By the time I reached the Center for Political Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, popularly known as JNU in New Delhi, Professor Vidhu Verma was teaching in the class with the original copy of the Republic written by the ancient Greek thinker Plato. The undergraduate teaching of Presidency College in Kolkata was mostly based on secondary readings about justice and other normative political concepts, unlike the original text in the postgraduate pedagogy of JNU. By the time I was attending regular classes of Professor Krittopriya Ghosh at Presidency College, I had chosen my topic of future research in my doctoral studies while consulting with him. Professor Ghosh was a Gandhian and an able brother of the famous poet and teacher Shankha Ghosh. He told me to do research in the field of Gandhian studies, which was already developing by the early 2000s. I was adamant about researching Amartya Sen's social and political theory. Sen was already an icon for many after October 1998, when he won the Serges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. Moreover, I learned from two signboards of Calcutta Municipal Corporation that once Sen lived in a house whose address was 16/11 Mandal Temple Lane near New Alipur P block. The house was near our residential locality on Taliban Circular Road. While attending a higher secondary school in South Kolkata and prestigious college in Central Kolkata, I attended almost every public lecture or visit of Sen to the city. Whether it was his visit to the stall of Bongio Shakharata Prasar Samiti in the Vidyasagar Mela in Kolkata, Maidan, immediately after he received the Nobel Prize in Economics, or his lecture in the College Street campus of Calcutta University when I was accompanied by my economics batchmates and the left activists of the Students' Federation of India in the early 2000s. At the same time, I followed almost every press statement by Professor Sen or his essays in either English or Bengali languages that were printed in Kolkata-based newspapers. Krittopriya Ghosh turned out to be liberal in his thoughts, and he encouraged me to pursue the findings in Sen's latest works, while pointing out that Sen can be placed within the Gandhian tradition instead of the political thought tradition of Tagore. By that time, Sen's development as freedom was already in the market. Sen's contempt for communal rights and faith in nonviolence was articulated in several lectures and press statements during that time. His consistency as a secular public intellectual is still noteworthy even today. As a public intellectual, Sen's insights were remarkable in the late 1990s and early 2000s, which convinced me to focus only on his recent writings after 1998. By the end of September 2001, my original plan to research Sen's social and political theory had to change. As a witness to the recorded visuals of the 9/11 attacks on television, I was convinced to work on Islamist political ideology that galvanized some Muslim youths from Middle Eastern countries to initiate such a gruesome act on the air and soil of the United States of America. However, my interest in political theory and Euro-American political philosophy never died. When I reached the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford in late 2007, I had three options to pursue my research topic on Islamist political ideology in contemporary India and Bangladesh. The three streams available for graduate students at that time at Oxford's politics department were political theory, number one, number two, comparative politics, and number three, international relations. I could associate with any of the three broad subdisciplines as my research topic would fit into any of those. Nevertheless, I consciously chose political theory, for which Oxford was and still is a global leader in the discipline of politics or political studies or political science, as the case may be. It varies from university to university. It also varies from continent to continent. At that time, I had an amorphous idea about doing a doctorate in politics by applying a methodological framework of morphological analysis of Islamist ideology by taking a case study of a moderate Islamist organization in the Muslim majority context of contemporary Bangladesh and a Muslim minority country of India. In doing so, the key idea was how Islamists mobilize people around the normative concepts of justice and equality. This paper is beyond such a scope, as the Cambridge University Press has already published my research findings in early 2015. In November 2008, when I personally met Amartya Sen in Delhi during the Platinum Jubilee celebration of his existence as a great human being, with a lovely sense of humor and a famous economist and philosopher, I was informed by him that he was writing a treatise on political philosophy with core concentration on justice. Eventually, his path-breaking book, The Idea of Justice, was published the following year. By August 2008, I was already given some oral doses of left radicalism by my old comrades in Delhi and Kolkata to keep away from Sen. Such a warning was given to me by some left activists because Sen was critical of the left in not following the policy of consultation in matters of governance in Singur, where a car factory owned by a leading corporate company would be set up. Also, he criticized the left for coming out of the Congress-led United Progressive Alliance government on the issue of Indo-US nuclear deal. When the book, The Idea of Justice, was published in London by Alan Lane in 2009, I was given the unofficial charge to argue and write a critique of Sen's book. In November 2009, Sen gave a public lecture, first at the examination school in the afternoon, in the presence of several philosophy and politics dons of Oxford, with a houseful number of attendees, mainly coming from Oxford's politics, philosophy, economics, law, classics, history, development studies, and sociology departments. The exam school lecture was followed by another talk by Sen at Oxford's Sheldonian Theatre in the presence of Lord Christopher Francis Patten, aka Lord Chris Patten, the Baron Patten of Barnes, and the Chancellor of the University. In the exam school lecture, there was no opportunity to question Sen, although I had met him personally after his book talk and told him that the concepts of antagonism, hegemony, and imperialism were missing in his book, and we cannot probably have an adequate understanding of justice and injustice without dealing with those concepts. He instantly told me that I could find the concept of antagonism in the index, and it would guide me to the exact page number where it has been discussed. I said that I had carefully read the book twice and could not find the concept at all. Anyway, after his prodigious speech in the Grand Assembly of Sheldonian Theatre, with many sitting on the ground, an event that could be easily matched with the public performance of a rock star, I had the opportunity to ask the first question about his newly published book, The Idea of Justice. Sen was reading parts of his new book in both the exam school and in the Sheldonian Theatre. I was already carrying the book and was pointing out to my historian friend on my left and a senior professor of Delhi University on my right, who was visiting Oxford, that how Sen was reading from different sections of the new book that I was carrying at that time. So here is the book, if someone can take a look for authenticity. I was wearing the suffrask of Oxford University with a white bow tie, a black suit, and a scholar's gown, as it was the norm to be present in front of the university's chancellor. I asked 3 questions from a top tier of the Sheldonian Theatre. The moderator of the session, Lord Patten, was careful to remind me that a microphone cannot be handed over to me as I was far away from the lower tiers of the theatre. With my scholar's gown, I had to introduce myself to the speaker, the moderator, and the audience as a Clarendon Hector Peeling Senior Whom Scholar at Brasenose College and a DPhil candidate in political theory in the Department of Politics and International Relations at the university. I asked 3 questions regarding the absence of core concepts like antagonism, hegemony, and imperialism that needed to be included in his book. A great clamor of claps in the hall welcomed my questions. Sen responded by uttering that he ignores the claps and that my point about antagonism is justified. Remember the chronology. In the exam schools, it was a different answer. Here it's a different answer. It's almost like a policeman investigating someone who is writing a thing. Anyway, so I'm just kind of joking here. However, he disagrees with what I have been calling hegemony and imperialism. At the same time, he needed to be more sufficing about his disagreement with me on his book's shortcomings by not incorporating the concepts of hegemony and imperialism in his tome. The next day, there was another session to interact with him at the examination school. He was a little late to arrive as he told a development economist how he had only cups of coffee before coming out from his Cambridge residence to attend the question and answer session. The examination school event in the morning was only restricted to politics, philosophy, and some development economics scholars, rather than to the general public as it happened in the last evening at the Sheldonian Theatre. After magnificent interventions from philosophy and politics dons like Stephen Mulhall, Stuart White, and Leah P., I had another opportunity to ask an additional question regarding his misreading of Marx. I mentioned that although we have not yet resolved the 3 questions of antagonism, hegemony, and imperialism last evening, I want to point out that his reading of Marx is incorrect as he has placed Marx within the school of realization-focused comparison or comparativism instead of a thinker belonging to the tradition of transcendental institutionalism, as he mentioned in the book. I argued that one could demonstrate such a problem with Sen's writings, where he took refuge in Marx and Engels' The German Ideology, in which both Marx and Engels were quite systematic to provide at least a blueprint of future communism, which could be only achieved by transcending capitalism. Sen could not answer it correctly, which the audience noticed, while he was very generous to note my question with a pen. In May 2010, I met Sen again. This time, he was delivering a public lecture in the memory of H.L.A. Hart, the fascinating scholar in jurisprudence. Hart was the professor of jurisprudence and a principal of Brasenose College at Oxford. I was sitting beside the then principal of our Oxford College, Professor Roger Cashmore, an experimental physicist and a former deputy director of CERN. At present, he has become a remarkable man by being the chairman of United Kingdom's Atomic Energy Commission. My Oxford College is a funder of two important lectures, the Tanner Lectures and the H.L.A. Hart Lectures. Listening to Sen about rights and responsibilities, I was thinking about Nietzsche and asked a second question instead of the first one that I did 6 months ago. Sen was very careful to listen to the question and remarked that it is certainly a remarkable question, and he slightly digressed about his own experience as a faculty in Howard University, followed by some observations on empire and imperialism. After the H.L.A. Hart Memorial Lecture, I took the signature of Sen, as I could not get it in November 2009, as the lower tiers of the Sheldonian Theatre were full of Oxonian crowd. After getting his signature, I told him that I belonged to a locality of New Alipur that he used to stay once upon a time. He immediately replied, New Alipur. Then I told him whether he had seen the review of S. Subramanian, Thinking Through Justice, that was published in May 2010 in the pages of Economic and Political Weekly. He said that he did not read the review, but he has heard of it. I told him by quoting Bernard Williams that he himself quoted in his treatise. Disagreement does not necessarily have to be overcome. He said, as they say. I was puzzled, who are they and who are we? As a student of politics, I was aware that such construction of our and theirs, we versus they, I versus you, are crucial in matters of serious debates in the discipline of political science. Then I replied that I have already written a critique of his book and has been sent to the Economic and Political Weekly. He gave me a strange look and then exchanged pleasantries with others who had gathered to greet him in the examination school of Oxford. In the next high-table dinner, my college principal, Cashmore, told me that Sen seems to be a man of the left. I disagreed with him, with Cashmore, and asserted that he is a liberal with some Marxist sensibilities, and his defense of capitalism can be noted from his own writings. To become left, one must have a clear vision to transcend capitalism and create a socialist order. I told Cashmore that human beings have never experienced communism, but it still exists as an idea which is worth pursuing. Cashmore, coming from a grammar school, trained in Balliol College and then at the University College at Oxford, was appointed the principal of Brasenose during the Labour regime in United Kingdom, had a very old vision of identifying the Labour Party with the left. By December 2009, I first wrote a draft of a critique of Sen's idea of justice, initially published in the now defunct blog Pragati, run by several left activists in India. A more sanitized version of the Pragati article was later translated into French by a friend of mine, Sophie Hine, who was doing her postdoctoral studies in the politics department at Oxford. A lengthier critique in the form of a reasoned disagreement with Professor Sen, our beloved argumentative Indian, was finally published in August 2011 in the pages of Economic and Political Weekly after 20 long months. The paper had only one flaw. It could have missed some lines on Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak, and a footnote on that text regarding an explanation of the theory of our great literary critique. However, I could not evade the discussions with a former economist of Calcutta University who understood my argument in the very first draft of my critique of Sen. At that time, the former economist of the University of Calcutta suggested that few lines of him on Spivak's essay in my original critique of Sen could be included. The anonymous referee and the economic and political weekly editors could have flagged this for me. Unfortunately, they did not. Although the original title of my critique of Sen was on unjustifications of Sen's idea of justice, it was published as Flawed Idea of Justice. This time, the title of the essay was provided by the EPW editors while maintaining the flaw inherent in my own article. Last time I met Sen in person was on 20th February 2023. After 12 long years, he was very generous to write a small appreciation of his memoir, Home in the World, which I liked, although there have been some factual errors along with the omission of his New Alipur residence. On 19 November, I had handed over a copy of my recently published book, Political Theory and South Asian Counter-Narratives, to his daughter Indrani with the following words: from a professor to a professor, with love, reason, and disagreement. Although he changed the copy of the book that I had bought with some page markings as it will be helpful in my current research on decolonization disciplines at the university, I did not repent to get a new copy of his memoir. Now, the training so far that I had from 1998 to 2023 of the 25 years of training already made me understand that the history of human existence has so far shown that no society has been just even after eventful political transformations such as the Spartacus slave revolt, English Revolution, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, Iranian Islamic Revolution, national liberation, and decolonization. Even after the transformation of the post-war welfare state to the retreat of the welfare state, with the emergence of the neoliberal state, justice has not been ensured to significant sections of the population in those societies. And indeed, one finds new forms of injustices appearing in the world. The normative idea of justice has been debated within the long tradition of political philosophy. Since various ideological positions have contested the ideas of justice and injustice, and there is already any conclusive, comprehensive, and consensual theory of justice, it is only fair to say that there can never be an adequate theory of justice. Amartya Sen has provided a fascinating argument for identifying manifest and redressable injustice rather than providing a theory of justice. This is because Sen argues that it is relatively easier to identify injustice than to have a consensus on the principles of justice. But can there be an adequate theory of justice? Unlike injustice, justice as a value is not merely relative and related to other normative concepts. Instead, it is profoundly elusive. However, if it is elusive, then why has it been often used in different political and philosophical discourses over time? One can argue that justice as a normative political idea or a normative political ideal with L is necessary for any political discourse to justify its actions and goals. By arguing that there can never be an adequate theory of justice, one can affirm the very idea behind the intellectual project of seeking an adequate theory. By answering no to the question in the discussion, can there be an adequate theory of justice, one can say yes to the attempt of theorizing justice. At the same time, by arguing that justice is elusive and yet it is necessary, one can also stand in solidarity with the intellectual project of asking the question in the discussion. This paper seeks to interrogate the very idea of justice from the perspectives of conceptual analysis and critical political theory, whilst playing with the Kantian terminologies of parallax and antinomy and the ideas of elusiveness and necessity of justice. Philosophy begins with introspection, says Kojin Karatani, a prominent Japanese anarcho-Marxist thinker. Karatani reads Critique of Pure Reason as a criticism of introspection, as opposed to the introspective nature of Kant's essay, Dreams of a Visionary, published in 1766. Kant used the term pronounced parallax in the Dreams of a Visionary to engage with the point of view of others, as opposed to saying human common sense only from the standpoint of his own. The pronounced parallax in Kant, Karatani argues, took the form of antinomy, the device to reveal both thesis and antithesis as optical illusions. In this respect, One can pose the antinomy or paradox of necessity and elusiveness from the point of view of the justice giving subject and from the point of view of those who promise justice to others. At the same time, one can situate the parallax or antinomy of desire and elusiveness from the viewpoint of the justice seeking subject. If the reader reads the last sentence clearly, then first of all, it is helpful to make a conceptual difference between need and desire. In the Lacanian sense, the desire is something which is essentially insatiable. And as Alan Sheridan, the translator of Lacan's works, suggests, it is the gap between need and demand that constitutes desire. By following the Lacanian logic, one can argue that both individuals and human societies have certain needs, biological and non-biological, which are articulated by speech addressed to the other as demands to fulfill those needs. Before explicitly posing the paradox between the justice-giving subject and justice-seeking subject on the one hand, and locating the antinomy between the justice-promising subject and justice-seeking subject, a brief overview of the contemporary debates on justice within liberalism must be delineated. So the next section is called Justice and the Contradictions Within Contemporary Liberalism. And Sen certainly follows in the liberal tradition that I shall argue. In his recent work in political philosophy, Sen incisively demonstrates that the second half of the 20th century and the first decade of the 21st century do not show a decisive break from the general trend of disagreement on the very meaning of justice, as one finds in the European Enlightenment tradition or the ancient and medieval period in both East and the West. The Rawlsian theory of justice was a strong defense for a liberal welfare state in the name of property-owning democracy. It was challenged by the libertarian response of Robert Nozick, who questioned the Rawlsian difference principle. However, as Michael Sandel argues, although the positions of Rawls, the welfare state liberal, and Nozick, the libertarian conservative, offer rival and competing theories of distributive justice, from a philosophical viewpoint, they are strikingly similar and have much in common. It is because both define their positions in explicit opposition to utilitarianism, which each rejects on the grounds that it denies the distinction between persons. Both appeal to Kant's precept to treat every person as an end and not merely as a means, and seek principles of justice that embody it. I just quoted Sandel. The Sandel is concerned with the universalist tendency of the liberal premise that prioritizes right over good and a homogeneous self over conceptions of community. In responding to Rawls, Sen makes a sharp methodological demarcation between two prominent schools of justice, namely transcendental institutionalism that I already mentioned earlier while making an autobiographical exchange with Sen, and realization-focused comparison. With such a brilliant methodological move, he is interested in just outcomes via comparative approaches to justice. While questioning the normative tradition of transcendental institutionalism of contractarian theorists like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Immanuel Kant, and John Rawls, all of whom imagine an a priori perfect just society or identify perfectly just social arrangements or just institutions, Sen is searching for an idea of justice rather than answering what is justice, and does not make a grand claim that this is justice. Sen's approach is not to provide an ideal perfect just society theory, but to look at alternative ways of removing injustices or ways in which injustices can be minimized in comparative approaches or realization-focused comparison, as he claims in extending the legacies of Adam Smith, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, Marquis de Condorcet, Mary Wollstonecraft, and Karl Marx. While Sen argues that the ideal perfect just society is elusive, I shall extend the query of Sen by arguing that justice as a normative political concept is itself elusive. At the same time, even if justice is elusive, it is necessary for politics and political mobilization. So there's a dialectics here. You need justice, but at the same time, you don't know what is justice. And if you look at several demonstrations where a lot of people say that we need justice, or we demand justice. And this I have a long, I can say for that I noticed that thing in Aligarh in 1998-99 when there was disturbances regarding the fifth pay commission so junior doctors went on strike and there was demand to for pay commissions, and there were demands against removal of the vice chancellor at that time, Mahmoud Rahman. And there was like all this, we need justice, we need justice. And so that it has a long, at least for my own association with politics and my own association with activism, I could find that justice is always, or not even always, but sometimes it has been articulated by those who do demonstrations. In this respect, a set of questions can be asked. Can ideal just social arrangements be regarded as unnecessary for human existence? Can justice itself autonomously offer anything concrete and substantial? Can justice be seen as an illusion, but still a necessary political utopia, a kind of unsatisfied Lacanian desire, which is unachievable, yet necessary for political mobilization? Can justice be regarded as both contented or value-loaded, and at the same time as a contentless, abstract, empty concept which has nothing to offer except hope and promise, and thus is necessary for justifications of either sustaining the status quo or for a call of transcendentalism, and hence the rhetoric of ideal just society in both secular and religious ideologies, as distinct as communism and Islamism? After all, Rawls's Harvard lectures mention that Marxian communism is a society beyond justice, where the question of justice has been resolved. Sen's book did not cite the Harvard lectures of Rawls, although it was published a few years earlier than this book came. So the Harvard lectures of Rawls, the lectures on political philosophy, was published in 2006-07. The book got published in 2009. Although Sen responded with dissatisfaction to the Rawlsian transcendental institutionalism, Laura Valentini has argued that Sen's critique of Rawls is either based on a misrepresentation of the Rawlsian approach or needs a more nuanced understanding of the Rawlsian paradigm. So Laura Valentini was basically critiquing Sen from the position of Rawls. She is suggesting, and she made this point long time back, even during the Oxford lectures and all, that Sen's reading of Rawls is incorrect. My intervention is that Sen's reading of Marx is incorrect. So that's the major kind of debate that Sen is having with younger political theorists like Laura and myself. However, without defending Rawls against Sen, one can interrogate Sen's comparative approach and his claim to distance himself from the paradigm of transcendental institutionalism. Transcendentalism is generally guided by a vision of building alternative institutions that could radically change the character of present institutions in a future society. In this respect, one can notice sharpness in making an opposition between transcendental institutionalism and comparative approaches in Sen's idea of justice. But why these are or need to be fundamentally different in Sen's approach is not clear. The question of selecting the ideal or perfect society is related to hegemony. Normative political philosophy within the liberal tradition hardly takes the concept of hegemony seriously, as if ideas like justice, freedom, equality, rights, etc. fall from the sky. The normative concepts like justice are not stationary. The contents and forms of justice vary contextually and are dependent on contesting forces struggling for hegemony. Thus, even those who do not explicitly believe in an ideal or perfection have their ideals and have some perfect just notions regarding life, morality, and actions that strive to counter contrasting notions of life, morality, and action. In this respect, Sen is rather more focused on institutionalism than on the notion of transcendental. And in such a case, an important question might be why, for Sen, the idea of transcendental is not worth defending. Exploring alternative ways of removing injustice is a different approach from building imaginary castles in the air by providing an ideal just society theory, which increasingly gets identified with an ivory tower philosophy, losing connectivity with real political praxis. However, Sen's model is tied up with a normative ideal where removing injustice itself becomes an ideal and thus can be transcendental as well. One could argue that since removing injustice is a central idea or ideal for Sen, it has an implicit transcendentalism. Let us assume that in society A, we are witnessing injustices like poverty, inequality, unemployment, illiteracy, health problems, tyranny, etc. Sen's approach would be to remove some, or if possible, all those injustices prevalent in society A, without having a prior agenda of what would be an ideal, perfect, just society, or what a perfectly just society would look like. If we are successful in eliminating or eradicating some or possibly all of those injustices, then society A loses its unjust identity and transforms itself into a different society, like a new society B, by getting a new identity. But society B will be fundamentally different from the unjust conditions of society A, and thus cannot be identified anymore with society A. Thus, after removing injustices from an original unjust society, an altogether different society is waiting at the end of the journey, transforming from an unjust society A to a relatively just society B. The particular journey or transformation from unjust society A to relatively just society B with Sen's approach of removing injustices cannot be separated from the approach of transcendentalism. So even if Sen distances himself from the idea of transcendental institutionalism, if we actually take institutionalism out of it, then the indivisible remainder of transcendental as a leftover is very much present in Sen. Thus, it is a fundamental methodological problem in Sen, whose disinterest in perfect just social arrangements and his differentiation between transcendental institutionalism and comparative approach are intertwined on the question of transcendentalism. So Sen's approach is effectively transcendental. Besides Sen's refuge in asking institutions like the United Nations, non-governmental organizations, corporate media, and activist organizations to ensure global democracy is nothing but a simple institutionalist approach. Therefore, his comparative approach is not only contradictory, but also deeply founded on institutionalism as well. One could also ask a valid question of why Sen has selectively engaged with the Western Enlightenment thinkers in dealing with the issue of justice, even though justice has been a concern for and a constant quest of political philosophy right from the days of the Greco-Roman and medieval theological traditions. Even if Sen's interest in looking towards non-Western sources for a theory of justice, and particularly his refuge in ancient Indian schools of Nyaya and Niti, Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata, and illuminating Indian personae like Gautam Buddha, Kautilya, Ashoka, and Akbar has merits, disengagement with ancient European and varied theological traditions on justice only limits his scope of inquiry. On that count, what Sen alleges about attention towards contemporary Western political philosophy can also be true in his case precisely because of his parochial disengagement with ancient European and distinct theological commentaries on justice. He has not provided a convincing justification for why the starting premise of his book is the European Enlightenment, which he then contrasts with some selected Indian thought. Furthermore, with what Sen calls our global heritage, trying to bridge a dialogue between selected Indian philosophy and modernist European Enlightenment thinking, he effectively denies the comprehensiveness of global heritage with the exclusion of ancient Greco-Roman ideas and different theological traditions of justice. On his neglect of ancient European and different theological traditions of justice, Sen can argue that he is merely interested in normative political philosophy and not in legal theories of justice or in jurisprudence, which are much indebted to ancient Greco-Roman and theological traditions. Thus, he can well argue that his dealings with dual philosophical approaches of transcendental institutionalism and comparative frameworks are justifiable. The point, however, is that what we identify as legalistic and theological traditions of justice are not at all devoid of normative dimensions of ethics, and indeed most are concerned with ideas of transcendentalism and institutionalism, and in many cases with the goal of removing injustices. On the issue of public reason and democracy, Sen selectively engages with Habermas as he did with Marx. Sen tries to problematize between the normative approach of Rawls and the procedural approach of Habermas on the question of identification of reasonable persons, and then withdraws himself to the issues of differentiation since they are not central to his approach. He argues that although Rawls and Habermas have positively contributed to the theory of democracy, both end up with a vision of a perfectly just society with which Sen disagrees, by suggesting that even if Rawls and Habermas differed in their approaches, they come to common conclusions. Here one could assert that Sen's argument about Rawls and Habermas arriving at common conclusions of a perfectly just society is too simplistic. Both Rawls and Habermas were also interested in removing injustices, which is Sen's concern. But their visions of an ideal perfect just society are different. In this respect, finding a universal model for removing injustice as exemplified in Sen is futile. Instead, one should look at particular notions of injustice in different societies while connecting with the universal grand narratives of removing injustice. For example, Western philosophers, more often than not, were interested in removing injustices in their societies, and their hegemonic thought in contemporary global academic discourses cannot be treated as universal. Therefore, one could certainly agree with Sen's criticism about the lack of familiarity with non-Western literature of Western intellectuals, and in fact, intellectuals all across the modern world because of the global dominance of Western education today. Saying so, one could partly differ with Sen's global perspectives, primarily because of the different nature of injustices across societies and even within the same societies. The injustices of racial discrimination and stereotype, particularly after 9/11, resulting in the global tide of Islamophobia, and the negative impacts of economic recession in advanced capitalist countries are fundamentally different from the Indian realities of deprivation, alienation, expropriation, exploitation, oppression, underrepresentation, communalism, caste-based discrimination, and exclusion of marginalized groups. Despite interrogating Sen with a set of critical arguments as provided above, one should not overlook his brilliant and indisputable contributions to political philosophy. One must note that the debates between contemporary liberalism and communitarianism were situated within the structure of capitalism. Neither liberalism nor communitarianism, nor Sen's realization-focused comparison based on his capabilities approach in the form of a modified version of liberal welfareism are calling for a transcending of capitalism. At best, liberals and communitarians are inventing new modes of accommodating difference, dissent, and democratic demands within the capitalist system. This leads to the question of how the Marxian project addresses the issue of justice. I am not elaborating the Marxian project because I have to stop by 4 p.m. and we have only 15 minutes. No, do I also? Right, okay. So justice and the Marxian project. Moving beyond liberalism and communitarianism is the philosophical genre of egalitarianism that foregrounds the idea of equality while discussing justice. On the one hand, such egalitarianism is taken up by recognizing identity and difference while questioning the distributive paradigm and foregrounding the concepts of domination and oppression, as in the treatise of Iris Marion Young. For Karatani, the counteractions against exploitation, alienation, inequality, environmental destruction, discrimination, and so forth are ethical and moral through and through. This is because Marx never denied the ethical dimension of an individual's responsibility in capital, and it is evident that socialism is motivated by morality, and Marx himself was so, except that he pointed out that the ethical movement that ignored the economic category would inexorably fail. That's what Karatani's take on Marx. Marx is like our teacher, beloved teacher Gerald A. Cohen and Etienne Balibar give prime importance to the inseparability of the principle of equality and the principle of justice. Alain Badiou has also used both justice and equality interchangeably. The egalitarian arguments only provoke us to interrogate the concept of justice within the Marxian idea of communism, because many of the egalitarian interlocutors are themselves inspired by the Marxian project. Does Marx explicitly discuss the ideas of justice and injustice? In his Harvard class lectures, Rawls suggests that Marxian communism is attributed to radical egalitarianism by the likes of G.A. Cohen and Norman Geras, who think that for Marx, capitalism is unjust. A communist society would resolve the justice question by eliminating injustices like alienation and exploitation, along with overcoming the division of labor. The Marxian ideal of a society of freely associated producers, or the higher phase of communism according to Rawls, would be a society beyond justice. However, how does one achieve such a society? Karatani has recently argued that transnational communism, as opposed to bourgeois nationalist capitalism, can be only based on an associationist model whose form of exchange could be mutual aid, or X, an unknown and yet unachieved social formation of post-capitalism in the form of association of associations. According to Karatani, the struggle at the very site of consumption by arresting the circulation of capital while boycotting capitalist commodities, building workers' collectives and local exchange trading systems, along with simultaneous global struggles against the bourgeois trinity of nation-state capital, might create conditions for an associationist model of possible communism. Thus, associationism is the name of a future communist society in the form of a world republic that is yet to be realized by transcending the trinity of the nation-state capital or capitalist nation-states. Associationism, according to Karatani, is a socialism that rejects the state, in contrast to the 20th century experiments of socialism by means of the state, because only the latter should be called socialism, while the former should properly be called state socialism or welfare statism. In this sense, associationism being the core of socialism consists of the return of reciprocal exchange in a higher dimension. It differs from distributive justice, that is from the amelioration of disparities in wealth through redistribution, in that it implements an exchange-based justice under which such disparities are prevented from occurring in the first place. Thus, for Marx, socialism was not a nationalization strategy or state ownership of enterprises that was followed after Engels. Rather, socialism was associationism along the lines practiced by the Proudhonist cooperative model. Thus, associationism is about creating the future anew, and as such seeks to transform the status quo. For Badiou, communism denotes only a very general set of intellectual representations for what Kant called an idea with a regulatory function rather than a program. As Badiou further argues, and I quote, "It is foolish to call such communist principles utopian. As a pure idea of equality, the communist hypothesis has no doubt existed since the beginnings of the state. As soon as mass action opposes state coercion in the name of egalitarian justice, rudiments or fragments of the hypothesis start to appear. Popular revolts, the slaves led by Spartacus, the peasants led by Munzer, might be identified as practical examples of this communist invariant. With the French Revolution, the communist hypothesis then inaugurates the epoch of political modernity." Unquote. It is such foregrounding of the idea of communism as an alternative post-capital society based on equality that makes the Marxist notion of a left-wing project fundamentally different from the liberal reformist politics. In other words, the widespread and commonsensical use of the term left liberal is an oxymoron. If the idea of transcending capitalism is an anchor concept in radical political philosophy, then from such a radical point of view, either one is a left or a liberal. The former is interested in transcending capitalism with an alternative vision of a post-capitalist just order, while the latter is convinced that there is no better alternative than capitalism and that capitalism can resolve all human problems. Thus, the ideological moorings of a just society are of crucial importance for addressing the question of justice. In the next section, I'm skipping because it will take time. It's called Political Ideologies and the Question of Justice. There is a lot of, yeah, that's, yes, absolutely. Right. Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. No, no, that's fine. It's like in a warm summer, all of you have come here to listen to me. It's quite an honor. Anyway, so now I'm completing the last section of the paper because I'm skipping the two ones because those are a little technical regarding ideologies, and then there is a section called contingency, hegemony, and justice. So the last section is called post-Marxism and the elusive nature of justice, because we had for an introduction where the scholar of the discipline is dealing with another scholar of the discipline. Then the second one was the contradiction with the liberalism, then the Marxian project of justice, and now the post-Marxism and the elusive nature of justice. The liberals think that there is no alternative to capitalism. Hence, capitalism is the base socio-economic system. Even if there are inherent problems within capitalism, they can be removed with either a state-sponsored welfare state or a market-centric minimalist and libertarian state. In contrast, the Marxist literature is preoccupied with the question of distributive justice and whether to invent the idea of a post-capitalist order in the name of socialism, communism, and associationism. Instead of providing a theory of justice, post-Marxists like Laclau and Mouffe, Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, argue for building a new hegemonic politics of radical democracy and suggest that the left must address the questions of both redistribution and recognition. This is remarkably similar to the project of Nancy Fraser, who argues that today justice requires both redistribution and recognition. Fraser elaborates on a three-dimensional account of justice encompassing redistribution, recognition, and representation, thus answering the question of what counts as a bona fide matter of justice, as well as addressing the question of who counts as a bona fide subject of justice. However, there is a nuanced difference between the above mentioned two positions. The post-Marxist political theory of Laclau and Mouffe is not interested in the question of justice as such, for it is an empty signifier for them, a signifier without a signifier, much like other normative concepts such as equality, democracy, freedom, etc. While Nancy Fraser takes justice as something given and thus is interested in the contents of justice or what justice means and what it should ideally deliver. In fact, Laclau's position on justice as an empty signifier is clear from his comments below from an interview with him in 2008. And I quote Laclau here. The concept of justice is the typical concept of an empty signifier, because what is justice or not in society is open to an infinite debate. So if you have the notion of justice, justice is something which has no clear content. But in order to link some content under certain particular circumstances, for instance, you can imagine a debate between a fascist and a socialist around what is a just society. They are going to discuss about many possible contents, but what they are not going to discuss is whether justice is just or not, because that has to be accepted as the very terrain of the argument. But in order for justice semantically to play that role is something that should not have any particular content. And the content is going to be even to the dialogical effort. Well, the content of justice is contingent. The category of justice, however, has to be present there from the very beginning. Unquote. Laclau and Mouffe's position is that we live in a world of economic inequality and the proliferation of multiple identity groups. However, there are disagreements on the theoretical and political strategies that need to be adopted to address both these issues. Some prefer to prioritize class struggles to address the question of economic inequality over any other forms of identity-based non-class struggles. Some are more interested in focusing on identity-based non-class struggles while overlooking the question of economic inequality. In the terminology of political philosophy, one can summarize that although both are concerned with an emancipatory project for particular constituencies like the labor, which is class, or marginalized identity groups like racial minorities, religious minorities, sexual minorities, ethnic minorities, women, etc., the focus on class struggles is anchored around the ideas of distributive justice and equality. However, those who are in favor of struggles of marginalized groups are more concerned with social justice and identity. In such cases, as Nancy Fraser argues, we encounter the either or choice, redistribution or recognition, class politics or identity politics, multiculturalism or social democracy. However, such decoupling of cultural politics from social politics of the politics of difference from the politics of equality, of the philosophical idea of egalitarian distribution from the politics of recognition is a false antithesis. As Fraser correctly argues, redistribution and recognition converge together despite their divergent philosophical provenances. The argument for social justice and identity not only asks for recognition of various democratic demands of marginalized groups, but also calls for equal opportunity. In this respect, the idea of equality is expressed in the social justice discourse in terms of equal recognition, equal opportunity, and equal treatment in the form of dignity. Thus, the precise point of departure between the two schools of justice and the apparent distinction between equality on the one hand and diversity and difference on the other is not a fundamental distinction. The challenge in this regard is to initiate and establish a dialogue between these two philosophical positions. Here one can ask a pertinent question: can difference and identities be commensurate with the project of equality? In this regard, the argument of Ernesto Laclau, while replying to Judith Butler, holds some merit. And I quote Laclau here: the proliferation of differences is the precondition for the expansion of the logic of equality. To say that two things are equal, that is equivalent to each other in some respects, presupposes that they are different from each other in some other respects. Otherwise, there would be no equality but identity. In the political field, equality is a type of discourse which tries to deal with differences. It is a way of organizing them, unquote. Taking a cue from the writings of Laclau and Mouffe, one can argue that class antagonism might be addressed under communism, but other antagonisms of race, gender, and environment might be still unresolved. In fact, with communism, there need not necessarily be an end to politics. As Mouffe states, in such a context, an intellectual practice of constructing an adequate theory of justice, as Rawls seemed to do, would be an exercise of political philosophy without politics. Therefore, a fruitful politico-intellectual task is to give primacy to politics, identify the antagonistic moments that are constitutive of human societies, and initiate a plurality of political struggles against multifarious power structures. Indeed, such political struggles might be possible in the name of justice, even if that is elusive. In this respect, justice can be regarded as one form of social myth. Here, Laclau's reading of Sorel's idea of social myths is relevant as they do not have all the precise details of a blueprint of society such as a utopia, but are restricted to a few simple images capable of galvanizing the imagination of the masses. According to Laclau, it is because we live in a situation as unjust that we have the experience of justice as an actual fullness, but there is no logical transition from injustice as lack to justice as fullness that would remedy such a deprivation. This is because many concrete contents can present themselves as the positivization of justice. The concrete elements as the positivization of justice are reflected in a series of public protests, especially after the 2008 global financial crisis. In this respect, a political theory of cooperative justice might simultaneously address the dual issues of economic inequality within the paradigm of distributive justice and the politics of recognition within the rubric of social justice. In addition to such a philosophical exercise, in search of a cooperative theory of justice, a theorization on the possible liaison between the Laclauian logic of autonomy and hegemony, and for the unity and emergence of the collective political actor, irrespective of the name, whether called plebs, underdogs, or people, must be foregrounded by the progressive forces who want to transform capitalism with the radicalization of the state in search of the 21st century socialism. At the same time, any new political project promising to deliver justice must concentrate on creating a new promise, a new hope, and a new utopia. However, the theorist of any such utopian vision or any new political project must be aware that the elusiveness of justice is nonetheless necessary for political mobilization against an existing unjust order and with the hope of establishing a just one. This is true for many political visions ranging from fascism, communism, religious fundamentalism, libertarian anarchism, etc. Thus, in response to the idea of communism within the corpus of Marxist literature, the post-Marxist theoretical position immediately warns that such a model of communism only becomes a name of the empty signifier, which is necessary for political mobilization, and it does not mean that if such a society were ever established, it would be a society without antagonisms or absence of politics. Those who are aware of post-Marxism would know that it is not a complete rejection of Marxism, but it entails revisiting and reactivating the Marxist categories, locating the limitations of orthodox Marxist analysis, and thus moves beyond the intellectual tradition of 19th and 20th century Marxism by inventing new conceptual apparatuses in the light of the contemporary problems of global capitalism and information rule society. The post-Marxist terrain argues that it is no longer possible to maintain the conception of subjectivity and classes elaborated by Marxism, nor its vision of the historical course of capitalist development, nor, of course, the conception of communism as a transparent society from which antagonisms have disappeared. Instead, it is through the development of some intuitions and discursive forms constituted within Marxism and the inhibition or elimination of certain others that a concept of hegemony could be constructed, and which may be a useful instrument in the struggle for radical libertarian and plural democracy. The difference between the promise of the political parties in their election manifestos and the delivery of those promises has now become quite widespread, and the gap between justice promised and justice delivered can be noticed in the operational mode of most political formations in the world. Moreover, the emergence of one influential leader backed by electoral majorities, communicating a host of promises by replacing the practices of consultations, mediations, moderations, and collective leadership is the new form of popular sovereignty, a trend associated with 21st century populism. We can notice such a trend among several leader-centric parties in various parts of the world. The surge of popularity of strong and decisive leaders asking for electoral support for populist promises, even in cadre-based parties, is a significant feature of representative democracies in the 21st century. This is almost like a return to the Hobbesian absolutist sovereign in the wake of the waning of the Lockean state as the personality cult figure of populism. Like a popularly chosen monarch, becomes the embodiment of a justice promising and justice delivering subject. Had the political parties and their popular leaders been aware of the limitations of their populist promises, they might have articulated the political campaign differently by adopting a rhetoric guided by cynical reason. In other words, the justice giving and justice promising subject must be aware of the limitations of both the promise and the premise of justice. Thus, promising justice is necessary for the justice-giving subject who fully knows that justice cannot be delivered as justice is inherently elusive. Needless to say that the motto must be clear for giving the clarion call. We know it, and that is why we are doing it, which is effectively saying that we know that justice cannot be delivered, and yet we have to promise justice. The above motto is the motto of a politically conscious and an enlightened justice promising and justice giving leader who is aware of the limitations and constraints of dealing with politics. On the contrary, if one says that we don't know it, but we are doing it, which in effect means we don't know what justice is, but we promise justice, then it is the cry of a leader who is not conscious about how to articulate and deliver justice. From the point of view of the justice giving or promising subject, one can paraphrase Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it in the following manner. The philosophers have only offered various ideas of justice. The point is that these are not truths in themselves, but are necessary for politics and mobilization. For the justice-seeking subject, the desire for justice is an everlasting desire which cannot be fulfilled, and thus justice is elusive for the justice-seeking subject. Therefore, one can rephrase Marx's 11th thesis on Feuerbach for the justice-seeking subject in the following way. The philosophers have only interpreted justice in various ways. The point is to seek it. Alternatively, the philosophers have only offered various ideas of justice. The point is to struggle for it. So from justice as a person when I was a teenager to justice as elusive but necessary, I think it has been quite a long journey. And thank you very much to be here, to be present in a very summer afternoon with 39 degrees centigrade, Kolkata. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Maidul. Comments, discussions, debates, collective questions, or
many thanks for that investigation. And actually, conclude abstract, and I'm missing one point that is related to Western concept of justice. Other this point, and the last area where it was a practicing justice. Some contradiction is some, whether it is really contradictions or making contradiction is not very careful on this.
Thank you, Maidul. Again, this is a question, not again, sorry, but this certainly is a question coming from outside of your academic sphere. So you gave us a cross-section analysis. I'm leaving out the personal encounters with Sen that took up a good amount of time at the beginning. Because, I don't have any questions there. I had more or less the same question. I was wondering, in relation, so whenever we respond to a work, we respond from our own intellectual preoccupation at the time. I have been working on the 1830s countries, as you know. I was thinking of the same question that what would you categorize as an Indian idea of justice? Is there there is a long philosophical tradition. There is a common understanding of the word as people understood it at the time. And then, of course, with colonial educational structures, what Patriarchy was colonial modernity, another whole different set of readings is being initiated, where we are then, as Indians, being introduced to Locke, to Hobbes, to Smith, and to all of the philosophers that you yourself have referenced. Following which, of course, our own fundamental categories, modern categories that we have been put in place since the 19th century, according to certain parameters that more or less correspond perhaps with European Enlightenment thinking and its subsequent manifestations, which were traced all the way to London. I was looking for a sort of in-depth analysis from you of what would have been the common popular notion of justice in the Indian mind in, say, 1820 or circa 1800. How does that concept change, or is it in fact certain original traditional concepts of justice that are then reframed, refabricated, repopulated? What is the change that is happening, if there is a change that is happening? Where, how, at what point do we as modern Indians reach a consensus on that empty signifier that you mentioned as the category of justice itself? Justice is an empty signifier. It has meant different things at different times. What, when, and how do we reach this current understanding of justice as we understand it today as Indians? When do you think historically how and when is our understanding of justice changing, if at all?
If you don't mind one answer.
Yes.
As this data, the context of theory, in data, there is something, but not business thinking justice and other religion also. So if you can point out some of this.
Then let me first answer these three questions, and then otherwise I will forget. So, so let me first start with the last question, because I need to also you need to again tell briefly the first question. Some things I missed in my notes.
Western concept versus the
Eastern concept. Okay. Okay, then I start with the first. Now, to answer you, I think the Sen has already made the readers at least a convincing argument that he is making is that since the Western education is dominant in the global academy, including the South Asian academy, a parallel Indian tradition of justice is somewhere missing, or at least less taught, and the Westerners, they don't know. I would add that if Sen had read Kalyan Sanyas kind of intervention in rethinking Marxism, then one of the Sanyas papers suggests that it is some kind of a sanctioned ignorance of the West. That, you know, because we don't know, we can't comment on it. But at the same time, it's like we don't want to also be very interested in your kind of an argument with a simple logic that we don't know your language. Now you don't know your language, but then you learn language, somebody should say. Now, what Sen is parallelly doing is here that he is making two schools of thought in justice. So one school is transcendental institutionalist, which he calls are more interested in policy, the exact what thing should be done. Okay, and there he is basically suggesting Adam Smith, the contractarian theories like Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Kant, and Rawls. These are contractarian theories, of course, very liberal. And they have a contractarian history, if you look at that. And he is saying that the parallel tradition, the Niti tradition, is some could be closer with the contractarian theories. Okay. Now, I don't know Sanskrit. I have very less idea about the Niti tradition here because I was not trained that. Maybe I will read, and I'm reading a little bit more from those who have written on it. The other school that Sen places in the Western epistemological group is that the realization-focused comparisons, where you have Adam Smith, Mary Wollstonecraft, Marquis de Condorcet, who actually was quite helpful in building the initial building of the social choice theory. Then even someone like Marx that he plays, which we of course we have a disagreement on that, where the comparativists were interested in removing injustices, unlike the first group, the contractarian, who said that this is what a just society should look like. This is what justice is, and justice can be only achieved in a just order, right? And he places this comparativist school with a clear, with this whole Nyaya tradition. So in the Indian tradition, you have the two schools of Niti and the Nyaya. And in the Western tradition, according to Sen's classification, you have the transcendental institutionalists and the comparativists. Transcendental institutionalists have a close parallel with the Niti tradition, and the comparativists have a close parallel with the Nyaya tradition. Sen is in favor of Nyaya tradition. He thinks that his own approaches, which is largely can be seen as a more saner version of welfare liberalism. That is my reading. The capabilities approach, the collective choice social welfare like economics and development economics like you, who are very aware of it, is they are more interested in just outcomes. And they're more interested in removing injustices than to have a very clear blueprint of what a just society is. So these are the schools that that you have. So the Indian tradition, the Sen has already said that. And that's what I have so far understood. Now, I don't know whether there are several other schools of thought who can be different from the Nyaya and the Niti tradition. So I can't answer the Indian school, but I think Sen's classification as far as the Western Enlightenment tradition is concerned is quite proper, except Marx should have been in the Transcendental Institutionalist group than to the Comparativist group, because Marx is a clear blueprint of what communism, and in several writings that you have in Marx. So that's the answer one. Now, answer two, justice in the Gita. Of course, Sen is not interested in making Gita as the prominent book, or let's say prominent text in the idea of justice. And even in the before is right, like something even in the Argumentative Indian or in Identity and Violence, particularly the public intellect, the Sen as a public intellectual after 98. The Sen before 98 is different from Sen after 98, because that's where the more sensationalism around the public sensationalism around Sen gains more. He is not foregrounding Gita, but he is foregrounding Mahabharata. Of course, Gita is part of that. But recently, interestingly, I was looking at a basic textbook of the Indian Constitution written by the Durgadas Basu. Now, I was looking at different editions of the Constitution. Now, in the 1976, the book got published when in the 1960s around, I think 1960 something. In the 1976, when emergency was there, and Durgadas Basu's 4th edition, he is quoting from Upanishads. Okay. Just after the page before contents and all. And he is himself quite a legendary figure in terms of the legal discourse in jurisprudence. And it's a basic textbook for Indian political science students also. And then I'm checking a much later version, which is a version which has just been published before his death. And then there the Upanishad is being replaced by the quote from Gita. So there is a kind of a change that he died in 97 at the age of 87. He was born in 1910. So of course, Sen is not foregrounding Gita here. So for Sen, the Mahabharata is a classic text of politics, and he gives examples from that. And of course, the Niti and the Nyaya tradition, which because I don't know Sanskrit, so I can't also deal with these concepts clearly. But maybe a lot of the Sanskrit texts have been now translated into Bengali or English, and I should read that. But for me as a simple political science teacher, for me the Niti is the policy that which I'm looking at at a different Bangla book that I'm writing. So that's my brief thing. As far as Rosika, your question is very, very important, and unfortunately, I'm not a historian, so I can't trace when there is the 1820s, 1830s, 40s, what does justice actually mean, and whether there is a tradition of justice as in the political theory tradition. Because justice as a political theory tradition and the kind of, particularly in the 19th century, late 19th century and early 20th century, the universities have been, universities have been growing, but in the 1820s, 30s, there were no universities, the colleges were there. So, so dharma is again close to justice. So Raj Dharma and all that is coming. And in Partha Chatterjee also made this, remark, not only remark, but I think he has quite dealt this issue in one of his essays in a volume which was basically written by the CCCC colleagues, Texts of Power. I think that's the book, where he actually deals with dharma and all. I had a discussion with Professor Chatterjee. He told me personally, of course, I have not seen the written writings. That is, I don't know. I'm not aware of that. That he couldn't understand Sen's placing of Nyaya Niti with the European schools, because that would be gross overgeneralization. One is that the colonial and the colonial and the colonized world, then the languages are different. Then at the same time, there is a proper strong university curriculums, pedagogy, and also long tradition in India with the there's a different kind of tolls and pathshalas and madrasas. They had a very different way of looking at pedagogy, understanding. The structure of power is very different. Modern colonial modernity has a very different structure of power. Here, there's a different structures of power. So justice for Indians, I'm kind of, I don't know, but it's more closely linked to the Nyaya thing, and it is more looked to the courts thing, but not as distribution, because we as political scientists in the domain of political theory, we are interested in the question of distribution and recognition. So distribution and distributive justice is linked to equality, and social justice is linked to the question of recognition, recognition, representation, those things, identity issues, and this is class issue. These two broad schools. This is where we can place that, but I don't, because I'm not a historian, I can't say in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s what would be the. Certainly, there was no electoral democracy at that time in India, but it was not there. Even the electoral democracy was not that universal. Adult suffrage was not there in the British colonies as well as in the colonial country. So I don't know what that kind of thing. Recent literature, of course, one of my very favorite Professor Simon Kenny, he is now doing very path-breaking work, very good work on climatic justice. So so how carbon emissions have is affecting the world, and what would be the policy regarding this whole who will emit that kind of a carbon. So there cannot be a universal uniform rule, because carbon consumption, carbon production, that has to be some kind of a basic agreement among nation states. So these things that he's working, that is, if some are working on justice and animal rights. Now I'm not interested in that domain. I'm very shameless to say that I'm very anthropocentric. You may allege that my old theological training in the Islamic tradition, which where the human being is central, where the world is actually being made for the human beings. It has a tradition even in the Judeo-Christian, because all the Semitic religions have a tradition there. So I'm very anthropocentric in that sense, but not just from the religious point of view, but even from the practical policy making point of view. I think that's saner to have. Now, those who believe in justice and animal rights, they will certainly attack me on those grounds. Those who believe in climatic justice and will certainly say that we should not be only interested in distributive social justice, which has to be more comprehensive. And I completely agree with those points. But I have to also understand my limitations. I have only one life. I will write my own planned magnum opus called a theory of cooperative justice, which I only said very little in the last part of this lecture. From in another 7 years from now. So when I reach 50th year of my existence, so when I will be celebrating my golden jubilee, which is 7 years from now, I will write that book. Only I will be only concentrating on that particular book. So yeah, and I will be celebrating golden jubilee as I exist, just like I'm celebrating silver jubilee of my association with political science.
Thank you. If that scope is so huge, I was a little lost. But so many things. I have like one or two. One is like things that you did last response, last part of your response. But I was thinking from a different angle. I was thinking that what you focused on is justice in a social political dimension. But what if one thinks of justice in a like much more broader ethical dimension, which is not only say a question of animal rights or like something of legality or something like that. But a question of how to, like, whether to, one can think of justice only in terms of like socio-political norms. Because the links to ethics. I was thinking whether you can, you may not also, but what happens to your work when it is linked to that ethical applications? Because I am thinking of like two things, three things rather. One is from the like the other tradition, quote unquote. Like say when one thinks of something like what in Mohammed is called omniscience. Like
If you can elaborate that.
yeah, it's like non-cruelty. So ahimsa, which is not like one cannot really stick to that. One has to be, one has to destroy some things where one dispirites or something. But omniscience, non-cruelty. Something like say, Original Chakraborty has very interesting things on that. Say, and in some part, I forget which part, it says that like when people are hungry around, one should not should not celebrate eating. It's not that one should not eat, but one should not celebrate. Like that sort of like there is an injustice in doing this. So what is this? Another is say when the question of impact,
Oh yeah.
say like when one talks about দুর্নীতির সাথে দ্বন্দ্বদাতা কামিত সমাধান সর্বশ্রেষ্ঠ like whether these kinds of things you want to talk to them.
Yeah.
And definitely from the continental tradition, the thinking of justice in relation to ethics, justice in relation to law, but not in the sense of like legality.
Yeah.
Please.
These are very provocative questions from a from a trained philosopher to another trained political philosopher. No, no. Anirbandha. In fact, I remember Anirbandha data parts of this paper way back in 2011, 2010, 2010, when he and one of his students were going to Shantiniketan, and I was also going with the paper to read the paper in the Department of Politics and Economics, and I first gave a very draft, a very elementary paper. This paper has eventually been more modified, and then finally there was a presentation in the. So a part of the paper was published in 2011 EPW, but other potentialities were presented in the Shimla conference in 2015 with Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarukaya, Partha Chatterjee, Shobhala Dattagupta. A lot of people were around. So that volume never came out. So I thought that it's better to don't wait and take out this paper and publish in this book. So Anirbandha, I absolutely agree with you that justice, I should actually think more on regarding justice as an ethical subject. Now, already in this paper, I've made those traces, that the traces are there, that it is certainly an ethical concept. But at the same time, there is a practical element to it, which the postmasters are completely pointing out to me. That look, you do not get swayed by the ethical project alone. Because when there will be if you are totally committed to the ethical project, there will be always a heartbreak. Because then you see the things will collapse, things won't, and that's why the the post-Marxists are very practical in that sense. They say that okay, you need to have justice, just like equality. These two core concepts of political philosophy, you need those because every time, whenever you need political mobilization, you need these grand concepts. But your intervention seems to be not at the macro level. Your intervention seems to be at the level of the individual, which the liberals will certainly have a certain kind of a fascination also, because it's here and it's not beyond just liberal and Marxist. Just like, let's say, even we do not um, label them as liberal or Marxist or post-Marxist or communitarian. Communitarians, of course, won't be interested in the individual, but I guess even if the liberal and the Marxists who are, and a certain reading of Marxism, a certain reading of liberalism are, then you are saying that the ethical project you have to then address in terms of non-cruelty. I completely agree that the non-cruelty, although the non-cruelty cannot exist, it only exists as an idea, because in order to exist ourselves, we have to do some cruelty, and that's we have to eat, drink.
It's not non-violence.
It's not.
non-cruelty.
Yes, it's non-cruelty, exactly. So here how do we? So my question will be then, how do we um, how do we live as a human being if a certain element of non-cruelty if a certain element of cruelty is not being accommodated by us, but what will be the procedure? That I'm quite not sure. So suppose being a vegetarian, I'm just giving an example. These are philosophical puzzles. Being a vegetarian, I have to eat a certain diet. But then Professor Jagdish Chandra Bose has already pointed out that the plants have their lives. Now, how do we cut the spinach or the lady's fingers or the brinjals and all? If that is the procedure, will be I got cut with a knife here, I cut with another different kinds of equipment. It is still some sense of cruelty on that particular plant. No, we can discuss it, but I'm just thinking aloud. But we should not celebrate eating. Yes, that's possible. Of course, we should not celebrate, but I'm quite puzzled with the current generation of Facebook, users. A lot of Facebook users. That is when I was in Facebook long time, few years back, couple of years back. I've now deleted my account. People used to just show what are they eating. In a place where in the friend list you have people who don't have a meal. People are showing that eating the dogs, eating the cats, eating other pets, while in beside you have a beggar who is sitting who actually doesn't have meal. Now this is a everyday cruelty and everyday kind of celebration of food in a society where both animals and human beings, animals are also human beings are also animals, but then they are coexisting together. Now I'm kind of quite disturbed by these kind of pictures at the everyday level. Now, the Muslims generally they say that do not show the foods and all when in the month of Ramadan, and that is kind of again showing the empathy for those who are actually fasting during the day. Now that is the empathy question that you ask. Now here the empathy is daya or empathy something else? How do you place empathy here? Is it empathy as daya or is just how do you place it?
I'm not going to answer this question. I'm going to only just remind that this notion of partnerships, like the person one of the persons who seems to be a protagonist of partnerships model is Hormobad. He's a man who kills for also butcher. Yeah. So like it's a much more nuanced.
Okay, great. So because I didn't know about this thing.
Like vegetarianism or But thereby don't say that that is also like very.
So he's a butcher. Now, in the Islamic tradition, I can only talk from the Islamic tradition because there is also a notion of very strong notion of justice in the Islamic tradition. There is the butcher actually for the halal meat is that there is a procedure to cut. Like, and the argument that is provided is that you have to be very, you have to 2.5 poach, and there's a technique where the animal will get less number of, less pain. I don't know because that's the legends and say. The Islamic traditions, they say. Whereas the one cut it is a huge blow for the animal. Now it can be contested. The other argument is that the one cut is actually painless than the 2.5 cuts, which is so if the thermobaz is a butcher, then what will be the procedure? I don't know. So here the cruelty and non-cruelty is something which I'm kind of a bit puzzled. And that is precisely why I am more interested in the anthropocentric idea of justice than to those who do serious political philosophy on animal rights. And I'm still fine with the climatic with Simon Canny and the entire followers of Simon Canny. He was a great professor in terms of when he was teaching us for the political theory workshop the first year. He was also researching on this climate, and he used to share some of his ideas with us. So I'm still fine, but I'm quite not sure about this empathy of. I agree with the empathy question, but I don't find myself in that particular ground. But what I can assure that my theory of cooperative justice will be dealing with all these concepts, the concepts of identity, social justice, distributive justice, equality, even climatic things, the recent literature that I will try to engage. But that is a much later kind of a project that I will have. So we will properly discuss and debate with it. I will probably learn a lot of things from you, just like I just learned from this one. চলছে না ওহো
I had a pretty basic sort of question, which is, if you assume that anyway, there can be nothing that we can think of as justice in a more absolute form, since it is always relative. So I'm not even thinking here of the moral and ethical dimension of being just or being unjust, etc. But I was interested in your anecdotal beginnings and the ending, where you begin by thinking of justice as a person, and you end by thinking of justice as an ever elusive, undependable concept. As a person or a profession, because you are continuously referring to lawyers, people who work in the courts. I'm here to just make a suggestion that if you were to think of what we may think of as distributive justice, or justice is something that is deliverable. Perhaps the average person, and that would include me along with maybe large sections of the electorate, perhaps work with the sense of justice as a person. And I'm saying this because even as they're aware that there is nothing called an absolute justice, that what is just for one person will not be just for another. So just as the butcher feels that a slow cutting is better than a quick blow, it is anyway unjust to the animal on which it is being performed. So I'm not going into that. But I'm here thinking that in an everyday sense of governmentality and expectations, if you think of justice as something that is deliverable and justice is something that is seen to be denied. But this is a very common concept of justice delayed is justice denied, justice that can be delivered. So here I'm trying to understand as somebody who's working in the domain of politics, both political theory, but politics is practice. Perhaps this is a very interesting notion of the state, perhaps the state representation, whether it is a Duare Sarkar official, whether it is a interventionist judge making a point, whether it's a social activist. For the child, whenever there's perceived injustice, it is a person who's the point of fault. I mean, often that person could fail. For an animal, there's an instinctive sense of who may be protecting. If there seems to be some cruelty, there's a leader. So I'm here trying to understand the space between that larger moral ethical sense of what is just and unjust, which one can never arrive at across different theoretical spaces, to this much more contractual zone, which is politics, where it is precisely that reaching of that boundary that seems to be often the point where a much more different political discourse of justice and kind of the traversing, the trespassing or the diversity of justice system. So whether it is about the lynching of a man carrying meat, imprisonment for charges which have not even come up in court, to basic denial of facility during COVID, where you could not avail of your basic right to breathe, you could not avail of oxygen, that is seen to be a denial. And there was always, therefore, a person, and therefore, just like all human beings, there's a question of accountability and blame and redress. So why is it that after every death, there is still a search of the parents for what we can think of redress? Redress for who? For a person. So I'm not sure that you have an easy question, but I feel it may be very productive at one point. Your personal story took you from people to scholars into a whole debate. But I'm thinking here about what becomes the points of negotiation. Because we want to work, and here on my colleague, I am thinking of social, political, medical justice, or things which we almost do without larger absolute notions of. So I'm thinking that maybe that is precisely the kinds of points of bargaining and a sense of limits that pushes politics, political activism in certain ways.
Oh, thank you. These are very profound comments and very, very. I think I have the right to, at least, right to decide, because this I'm noting whatever. This will go into my notes. So no, I think this is very, very profound comments and very, very good, excellent suggestions. For me, I think the post-Marxist position from where I'm coming from, for us, the social is the starting point. So we have demand, and the demands making a structured society, and then from society, the a political is erupting, and where the very clear-cut antagonistic frontiers between I, you, we, they, us versus them, these are coming. And in the matters of court also, you have generally you have the two parties, so the petitioner and the respondents, and there is a versus thing, which the law students are here who are kind of. Now, what is happening increasingly, and since you mentioned about Duare Sarkar and all in Bengal, what is also interestingly happening, and we all know that this popular perception of justice is a person, and so the judicial magistrate and the lower court, high court, they're like, so you have, and we all read in the newspapers and also in the electronic television, which judges have made, which observation. You know, the observations have now become a kind of verdict thanks to the media trial, you know. So a lot of, so now point, now in the, from the liberal point of view, the procedural things are very important. Now in the, so the, but at the same time, because we live in a populist democracy, which is run by social media and television media and media trials, the procedural correctness and the procedural flaws are often overlooked. But in order to have a just outcome, not I'm talking about just outcome in the same sense, but the just outcome of a proper case, on a legal case, let's say. The procedures are very, very crucial because these are one step by step that things move on. Now, because of course one could say that, you know, this dates that you get from one date to another is so long because, you know, you get a date, suppose two parties are fighting in a court because they have massive disagreement, they cannot amicably settle their problems, they move to court. And then you have a sense of, and recently I was having in you know, exchanges with lawyers in the lower court of Alipur. They said that, you know, things are in India, things are like that. And they said that, you know, sometimes not every, but sometimes it actually looked like a film in the you know. And I was reminded about this Damini film where, you know, Sunny Deol, who was an absolute alcoholic, and then he come to the legal profession again, and he made this famous speech, the Tariq pe Tariq and Tariq pe Tariq. So this is what this justice delayed is justice denied, and that is a everyday you know, everyday proverb that you find. It's an everyday experience, exactly, and that's why people don't move to the police station to lodge a complaint, but and then to take the case further. There's a lot of bureaucratic and legal paraphernalia which any, you know, an ordinary citizen of this country will not take that kind of risk. Not like risk, but I mean just not take that kind of harassment that a citizen faces each day and every day in a matter, in the police station, in the court. But if you are a conscious citizen, and that is what I am now of late doing. So whenever a tour traveler doesn't deliver on time, I first lodge a complaint in the local police station. I take a video and then take a photograph, and with that evidence, I go to the police station. Whenever Uber driver or Ola driver misbehaves, not only on the app, but, you know, sometimes I'm tricky, I go to the police station. But now, not all people will do that because they have several other things to do. But as far as this, the new interventions of the government at your doorstep, in the and this is which is very dangerous. What is happening now is that unlike the original framers of the Indian Constitution, which thought that we should have an independent judiciary, and there has to be a strong separation of powers between legislature, executive, and the judiciary. What is happening, interestingly, is that because of the liberal democracy turning into a populist democracy, I will say that this populist democracy was already there. The seeds were already there in the 1905 partition, then the 1919 Act, 1935 Act, and then in the Constituent Assembly. Now, if we move to the regional linguistic reorganization of states, that is a very, very popular kind of a movement in the 1955, 56. The 56 we got the states. Although the provisions of the states were there in the Government of India Act 1935 already. You see that the popular sovereignty is in which the leader-centric parties that I mentioned in the last part of the paper, is where the executive, the elected executive, is now the supreme entity running the entire show of democracy in practice. But at the end of the day, it is not that kind of a democracy, So Didi ke bolo, Modi is the same thing where exactly you need the face, and she is the candidate in every 294 assembly constituencies. It's very much anchored around that person. And recently, I had because I'm writing a book on political Bengal, populism in government and opposition, and I'm taking all these notes and field notes and all. So some of your suggestions will help me in writing that. And recently, I was in the Mamata's Dharna on the issue of the federalism issue. And for the very first time, I actually saw how the Dharna, because I missed the Singur Dharna long back, because at that time I was preparing myself to go abroad. But then she was magnificent, and I was watching very closely from the left flank and the right flank of the main Dharna. I went to participate in the iftar, which was there. I of course fasted at that. First day I didn't fast. Second day I fast. Moved to Kudira Monushilal Kendra, where Arup Biswas and Indranil was there, and so was Siddiqullah Chaudhuri, who was there. And they were interesting. The namaz happened, the Maghrib namaz happened before the iftar happened. So how things are being managed and how it's a very event management thing. Then I asked a political scientist of Calcutta, and I said that how much money the television media actually invested in running the show, because Dharna was very less in number. But you were just suggesting that this is the thing. And I was saying Tata to all the cameras in the television. And I said that, come on, Tata to all of you. When I'm bored with you, I will be more writing in print than go to your studio for my 2-3 minutes of expert comments, and then wasting 2 hours to 4 hours of my very valuable time, which I could have actually read a great article or a great essay, or I was just sing. I could sing. You made me a hero, right? In your television thing, Tata to you. Okay. So that's interesting. So I was quite happy to be part and parcel, again, participant observer in the Didi's program. But the issues were great. So I had a solidarity with him on the question of federalism. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm end. Can I just end? End.
Yeah, I think just end. I need to have uploaded somewhere. This is your laptop.
Library.
Can you just check if it's recorded? End meeting for all.